flames devoured the streets of Camulodunum, turning Rome's pride into ash. Smoke rose over Britannia as cries of vengeance echoed through the land. Tens of thousands of warriors, led by the fierce Queen Boudica, swept across the Roman settlements, leaving terror in their wake. Amidst the chaos, one man stood firm: Suetonius Paulinus, a general whose steel resolve would face an unrelenting storm. In this land where empires trembled and history teetered on the edge, the fate of Rome hung by a thread, ready to be decided in fire and blood. Will Rome survive the inferno unleashed by Boudica's wrath? Witness the rise of heroes, the clash of empires, and the relentless fury that shook Britannia to its core. Stay with us as history ignites in a tale of fire, blood, and unyielding courage. The dawn over Britannia was heavy with unease. The island, freshly claimed by Rome's iron hand, had seemed tranquil, its forests whispering secrets of old tribes, its rivers carrying the promise of fertile lands. But beneath this calm lay a seething resentment, a hatred long nurtured by oppression, humiliation, and the greed of conquerors. The Iceni, once loyal subjects, had been stripped of dignity and land. Their queen, Boudica, had watched her people suffer while Roman governors enriched themselves, indifferent to pleas for justice. When the humiliation of her family ignited, Boudica's fury became a conflagration. Her husband's lands were seized, her daughters violated by the arrogance of Roman soldiers, and the empire's laws turned justice into mockery. The Iceni queen did not merely mourn, she raged. From the wilds of the north, her call for vengeance resonated, summoning warriors from neighboring tribes, each thirsting for revenge. What began as whispers of rebellion grew into a roaring tide. Camulodunum, the jewel of Roman domination, became the first target. The city had been a symbol of unassailable power. Marble columns gleaming in the sun, temples dedicated to Roman gods, and fortified walls meant to repel any threat. Yet, against the fury of Boudica, these defenses were meaningless. Her forces surged like a storm unleashed from the forests, their cries echoing through the streets, terrifying both soldiers and citizens. The air itself seemed to catch fire with their hatred. Roman veterans, once proud of their discipline and swordsmanship, found themselves disoriented, their formations broken by the sheer ferocity of the onslaught. As flames consumed buildings, smoke darkened the sky, blotting out the sun. Markets, once bustling with merchants, were reduced to cinders. The statues of Roman gods, meant to inspire reverence and obedience, were toppled, shattered under the weight of rebellion. Citizens ran through streets slick with blood, their screams mingling with the roar of warriors and the crackle of fire. For Rome, it was a nightmare no one had anticipated. Their dominion, so recently cemented, seemed fragile. An empire that had conquered continents now threatened to crumble under the fury of a single queen. Boudica herself rode at the forefront, her presence like a flame given flesh. Her hair, wild and untamed, whipped in the wind. Her voice carried commands sharp and relentless, directing the chaos with precision that belied the apparent disorder. Each strike she led was both vengeance and warning. Rome's reach, vast as it seemed, was not infinite, and its pride could be burned. As Camulodunum fell, the rebellion's momentum only grew. Towns along the route of her march were abandoned or destroyed, resistance crushed under the weight of her wrath. Her army, swelling with tens of thousands of warriors, became an unstoppable tide, each wave bringing destruction and fear. In Rome, news of the uprising spread like wildfire, striking terror into the hearts of senators and generals alike. Letters from Britannia spoke of slaughter, of cities razed, of the empire's might humiliated. Panic gnawed at the corridors of power. Nero himself shivered at the thought of losing control over a distant province, a province whose revolt now threatened to undermine the very image of Rome's invincibility. And yet, even in this chaos, a spark of hope remained. The knowledge that a few steadfast commanders, like Suetonius Paulinus, might yet salvage what could be saved. But for the moment, Britannia was a land engulfed in fire. The Iceni queen had turned anger into action, vengeance into strategy. Rome's pride had been wounded, and the empire now faced the undeniable truth. Even the mightiest power could bleed, and sometimes all it took was one indomitable soul to set the world ablaze. The stage was set, the flames rising ever higher, and history was about to witness the Inferno of Boudica's wrath. Amidst the chaos of smoke-choked streets and burning cities, one figure moved with calm precision, a pillar of steel amid the storm of vengeance. Suetonius Paulinus, the Roman governor and general, had seen the horrors of war before. Yet nothing prepared him for the fury unleashed by Boudica. The screams of the fallen, the crackling of flames devouring the proud structures of Rome's dominion, and the terrifying spectacle of tens of thousands of warriors advancing with relentless hatred might have crushed a lesser man. But Paulinus's eyes were unshaken, his mind sharpened, calculating, and his heart steeled against despair. In Camulodunum, the remnants of Roman forces had scattered, their formations shattered, their morale in ruins. Soldiers who once prided themselves on the invincibility of Rome now wandered, lost and trembling, as they witnessed their world crumble around them. Paulinus rode among them, a figure both commanding and reassuring. His voice cut through the chaos not with threats, but with clarity and resolve. "We are beaten, yes," he admitted. "But we are not broken. Rome survives wherever her will endures. Gather yourselves, for we shall defend what remains, not for walls, nor for temples, but for the soul of Rome herself." It was a vision that ignited determination. Soldiers, worn and weary, began to regroup under his command. Paulinus understood that no ordinary strategy could counter the wild fury of Boudica's forces. He could not hope to confront the rebellion head-on in the open fields or defend every city. Such attempts would have been suicidal. Instead, he sought to preserve the core of Roman strength, the disciplined, trained legions capable of striking decisively when the moment came. His plan was not built on glory, but on survival and patience, a hallmark of Roman strategic genius. The general moved quickly, assessing the landscape of Britannia with eyes trained by years of campaigns across distant provinces. He scouted routes, identifying defensible positions where terrain could neutralize the numerical advantage of the rebels. Narrow valleys, wooded passes, and river crossings became his allies. Wherever Boudica's warriors could not deploy freely, Roman discipline could dominate. It was a war of attrition, a chessboard where each move had to be precise, each step calculated to draw the enemy into disadvantage. Paulinus's leadership extended beyond mere tactics. He walked among the men, listening to their fears, calming their anxieties, and reinforcing their confidence. He reminded them of Roman traditions, of victories long past, of the glory that awaited those who could endure. Yet he tempered encouragement with realism. "Do not fight for pride," he warned. "Do not fight for houses or cities already lost. Fight for Rome herself, for her spirit endures even when stone falls to flame." In his presence, the men found their purpose renewed, a flicker of hope amidst despair. News of Boudica's victories spread rapidly, but Paulinus did not allow panic to dictate action. He communicated with scouts, gathering intelligence on enemy movements, numbers, and morale. He observed the patterns of the rebels, noting that their rage often blinded them to caution. Boudica's army, though vast and ferocious, was driven by vengeance more than strategy. Paulinus recognized this as a weakness, one he could exploit if he maintained discipline and patience. His mind, even under the pressure of imminent threat, remained a battlefield of its own, constantly weighing options, considering risks, and preparing contingencies. As he consolidated his forces, Paulinus also sought alliances among local tribes still loyal to Rome. These smaller contingents, though fewer in number, provided invaluable knowledge of terrain, enabling the legions to maneuver effectively. The general understood the importance of intelligence, reconnaissance, and morale. Rome could not afford to be reactive. It had to dictate the terms of engagement. Every decision was deliberate, every move calculated to turn the tide of despair into a position of strength. Paulinus's stoicism became legendary among his men. He shared their dangers without complaint, often placing himself at the forefront of perilous missions to scout enemy positions or reinforce embattled units. The soldiers saw not just a commander, but a symbol, a living embodiment of Roman resilience, courage, and strategic mastery. Where fear might have paralyzed ordinary men, they found renewed purpose under his unwavering gaze. His presence alone steadied wavering hearts, turning panic into determination and chaos into coordinated action. But leadership in such times demanded more than courage. It demanded vision. Paulinus foresaw the necessity of a decisive engagement, one that could exploit the discipline and training of his legions against the raw fury of Boudica's warriors. He identified a narrow defile, flanked by dense forests and impassable terrain where the enemy's numbers would count for little. Here, he could enforce Roman order, control the battlefield, and maximize the effectiveness of his troops. It was a risky maneuver, demanding precision and timing, but it offered the only viable path to salvation. As the legions marched toward this chosen ground, Paulinus continued to inspire and instruct. He drilled formations, reinforced the use of shields, coordinated the placement of archers and cavalry, and reminded every man of the value of discipline. The rebels, unaccustomed to such cohesion, would find their fury met by an impenetrable wall of steel and strategy. The general's mind worked tirelessly, predicting the enemy's movements, adapting tactics, and preparing contingencies. Through smoke, fire, and cries of despair, Suetonius Paulinus emerged as the embodiment of Rome itself, unyielding, relentless, and resolute. He transformed a shattered, demoralized force into a cohesive army capable of standing against an inferno of rebellion. In the midst of Boudica's wrath, he became the beacon of hope, the steady hand guiding the legions through chaos. Where others saw inevitable defeat, Paulinus saw opportunity, a chance to turn despair into victory, fury into strategy, and to prove that even in the darkest hour, Rome's spirit could not be extinguished. And so, as Britannia burned and the echoes of vengeance thundered across the land, the stage was set. One man, disciplined and unwavering, stood ready to confront the storm. Suetonius Paulinus, with the eyes of history upon him, prepared to face Boudica, not as a victim, but as Rome incarnate, a general whose courage, intellect, and resolve would shape the fate of an empire. The fires of rebellion would not consume him. Instead, they would forge the path for one of the most decisive confrontations in Roman history. Rome, the eternal city, had long prided itself on the invincibility of its dominion. Its legions had marched across deserts, rivers, and mountains, subjugating kingdoms, bending nations under the weight of Roman law and might. Yet, as the first reports of Boudica's uprising reached the Senate, a chill of disbelief swept through the marble halls of power. Camulodunum had fallen. Towns had been razed. Roman citizens, men and women alike, slaughtered without mercy. The empire, so vast, so unshakable, seemed suddenly fragile, vulnerable to the fury of one queen and her army of insurgents. The news arrived in fragments at first, carried by terrified couriers whose faces were pale with the horrors they had witnessed. Senators gathered in hurried, tense meetings, the usual pomp and ritual replaced by grim whispers. Some denied the reports, convinced exaggeration had colored the truth. Others, more attuned to the grim realities of conquest, trembled with the realization that the empire's authority was being openly defied, and that Rome's reach might not be as absolute as it had always claimed. Political rivalries were temporarily suspended. The survival of Rome itself demanded attention, and the senators' deliberations were haunted by an unfamiliar fear. Fear that Rome might bleed, that her symbol of eternal power might be marred by flames rising from distant Britannia. Emperor Nero, enthroned in the golden palace of the Palatine Hill, received the news with a mixture of disbelief and terror. His empire, which he had inherited and imagined himself destined to govern with grandeur, now faced a threat that seemed almost personal. Britannia was more than a distant province. It was a testament to Rome's capacity to civilize and command. Yet in Camulodunum and the surrounding towns, that testament had been scorched to cinders. Nero's advisors urged immediate action, dispatching reinforcements and calling for a rapid response. But fear gnawed at the emperor's mind, and hesitation shadowed every decision. Could the empire truly contain this rebellion? Could Roman authority survive the inferno of Boudica's wrath? The rebellion exposed vulnerabilities long ignored. Britannia was distant, its geography harsh and foreign, and the legions stationed there were spread thin. Communications were slow, reinforcements delayed by treacherous seas and hostile tribes along the route. Rome, so used to instantaneous obedience from its provinces, now faced the limitations of distance, of logistics, and of an adversary who exploited both with cunning and ferocity. The empire's advisors spoke of strategic withdrawal, of fortifying remaining cities, but even this cautious approach seemed inadequate against the relentless tide of insurgents sweeping across the land. The Senate, desperate to maintain the image of authority, debated feverishly. Some proposed severe reprisals to send a message to all provinces that defiance would be met with annihilation. Others feared that rash action might worsen the situation, galvanizing tribes against Rome with tales of brutality. The political discourse, normally measured and ceremonial, became a theater of panic and urgency. Letters flew across provinces, summoning governors, legions, and even loyal tribesmen to quell the flames. Rome was alive with tension. As if the entire city could feel the heat of fires hundreds of miles away, the screams of the fallen carried across the empire's mind. Amid this turmoil, one truth emerged starkly. Rome's dominion was not absolute. A single uprising, led by one indomitable queen, could challenge the prestige and might of centuries. The empire's pride, built on the notion of eternal conquest, now faced a humbling reality. The power of Rome, long assumed unassailable, could be tested, and perhaps even pierced, by the fury of those it sought to subjugate. Senators whispered in corridors, hoarding fear behind carefully measured words. Some questioned the competence of local commanders. Others debated the wisdom of distant governance. It was clear that the empire had underestimated the resilience and spirit of those it conquered. Yet, even in fear, Rome did not surrender. Messages were dispatched to loyal commanders, urging swift and decisive action. Resources were gathered, troops mobilized, and the machinery of war began its slow churn toward Britannia. The empire's administrators worked frantically to ensure supply lines, to reinforce fortifications, to maintain communication. Every decision was tinged with urgency, every decree a testament to the empire's determination to survive. Rome's heartbeat, once confident and steady, now raced with anxiety and resolve. The psychological impact of Boudica's revolt was profound. Citizens of Rome, hearing tales of fire, blood, and annihilation, questioned the empire's capacity to maintain order. The idea of invincibility, a cornerstone of Roman pride, was challenged. Scholars debated, poets lamented, and priests offered prayers to the gods for deliverance. The empire's mythology of power, built on centuries of conquest and domination, was shaken. Rome had faced rebellions before, yet never with such intensity, nor with such clarity that its authority was vulnerable. Boudica's fury was a mirror held up to the empire, reflecting both its might and its fragility. Despite the panic, a current of hope persisted. Suetonius Paulinus, stationed in Britannia, remained a figure of competence and courage. His strategies, though distant from the capital, represented the empire's chance to reclaim order. Rome's governors, though trembling with fear, looked to him as a stabilizing force. The Senate and Nero understood that the outcome of this revolt would define Rome's legacy, not just in Britannia, but throughout all conquered lands. Victory would reaffirm the empire's power. Failure would embolden rebellion across the known world. The stage was set, an empire shaken yet unbroken, a capital trembling with fear yet mobilizing for action, a distant province aflame yet poised on the brink of confrontation. Rome, for all its grandeur and centuries of conquest, was forced to confront the sobering truth. Even the eternal city could bleed, and the strength of an empire depended not only on its legions, but on the courage, strategy, and resolve of men willing to stand against the fury of history itself. Boudica, queen of the Iceni, rose like a tempest across the lands of Britannia, her presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Unlike ordinary leaders, she did not command merely by title or decree. She wielded authority forged from pain, loss, and an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. Her people's suffering had become her own, and in her eyes blazed the fire of 1,000 injustices. She was a figure of myth made flesh, both revered and feared, whose mere approach turned the earth into a theater of fury. From the dense forests and rolling hills, tens of thousands of warriors answered her call. Not soldiers in the Roman sense, drilled and disciplined in formation, but fierce fighters driven by a singular purpose: to annihilate those who would oppress them. Men and women, armed with spears, axes, and crude shields, moved as one, their fury synchronized by loyalty to their queen. Each step forward carried with it the weight of grief. Each swing of a weapon was vengeance made tangible. Across Britannia, villages rose in revolt at the sight of Boudica's banner, a symbol of defiance that demanded obedience or death. The sheer scale of her uprising was staggering. Camulodunum had been only the beginning. Colchester burned, but the fire spread far beyond a single city. Towns that had seemed secure, fortified, and loyal fell under the relentless wave of insurgents. Roman legions, trained for open battlefields and orderly engagements, were unprepared for the unpredictability of such a force. Boudica's army moved with speed, exploiting terrain, forests, and marshlands to confound the invaders. They struck quickly, vanished, and re-emerged elsewhere, leaving Rome scrambling to predict their next strike. Boudica herself led from the front. Mounted on a horse of fierce stature, her mane whipping in the wind, she was a vision of wrath incarnate. Her voice carried commands over the roar of battle, instilling courage into the hearts of her people and fear into those who faced them. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, missed nothing. She could read the flow of combat as if the chaos were a script she alone understood. Each decision was deliberate, each maneuver calculated to maximize the terror and devastation inflicted upon Rome's forces. In her presence, her army became more than a horde. They became an unstoppable force, an extension of her own indomitable will. Yet Boudica's fury was more than mere emotion. It was strategic genius masked by ferocity. She understood Rome's strengths and sought to neutralize them. Narrow streets, fortified towns, and rigid formations became targets of psychological warfare. Her attacks on Camulodunum and later towns were not only acts of vengeance, they were demonstrations of Roman vulnerability. By targeting Roman citizens and allies, she undermined the empire's reputation and instilled doubt in hearts that had long trusted Roman protection. Every victory she claimed spread panic, weakening the morale of those who remained loyal to Rome and bolstering the resolve of tribes yet to join her cause. The insurgents were bound together by a shared understanding of injustice. Boudica's words, sharp and persuasive, turned grief into purpose. "We are the fury of the wronged," she proclaimed, "the storm that will remind Rome they are not gods among men." Her rhetoric was matched by deeds. In battle, she embodied the wrath she spoke of, charging into the thick of fighting, her presence transforming fear into fanaticism. Each fallen Roman, each razed city, became both a symbol and a message. The empire was not invincible. And for the men and women of Britannia, this knowledge became intoxicating, fueling a rage that few armies in history could match. The Roman commanders, far from the fires of revolt, began to grasp the scale of what they faced. Suetonius Paulinus, though brilliant and disciplined, could not ignore the psychological weight of Boudica's uprising. Her army was vast, her hatred pure, her leadership magnetic. Where Roman soldiers relied on training and order, Boudica's warriors drew strength from passion, vengeance, and unity under a cause greater than themselves. The contrast between the disciplined legions and the frenzied insurgents was stark, yet equally perilous. One misstep could allow the fury of Boudica to sweep all before it. Boudica's tactical awareness was evident in her selection of targets. Roman settlements, symbols of oppression and wealth, were attacked first, while lightly defended towns were left for psychological dominance, demonstrating that no place was truly safe. Her army adapted swiftly to circumstances, exploiting weaknesses in Roman formations, terrain, and intelligence. Unlike the legions, which required supply lines and structure, Boudica's forces were self-sustaining, motivated by a hunger for vengeance, and unencumbered by the rigid discipline that sometimes slowed Roman adaptability. But it was not just the military threat that made Boudica formidable. She became a symbol, a rallying point for all those discontented with Roman rule. Her name spread across Britannia like wildfire, inspiring tribes who had long chafed under imperial dominance to rise in solidarity. Every victory added momentum. Every act of defiance magnified her legend. The psychological impact of her rebellion was as deadly as her army. Fear, awe, and admiration intertwined, making her both leader and myth. To face Boudica in battle was to confront not only a general, but the collective wrath of an entire people, a force that seemed as inexorable as nature itself. Despite the scale and ferocity of her uprising, Boudica remained disciplined in purpose. She did not squander her forces in reckless assaults, but calculated her campaigns to maximize damage, terror, and morale impact. Each town destroyed was a message. Each battle fought on her terms further eroded Roman confidence. Her strategy combined the unpredictability of a storm with the precision of a master tactician, creating an enemy that could not be easily measured, anticipated, or defeated. As her army marched onward, the legacy of Boudica was being written in fire and blood. She was more than a threat. She was a force of nature, the embodiment of defiance against an empire that had underestimated the resilience of those it sought to dominate. For Rome, she was the storm that would test the limits of discipline, strategy, and courage. For Britannia, she was a hero, a queen whose wrath would forever echo in the annals of history. And so, as the sun set behind smoke-filled skies and the cries of battle echoed across the countryside, Boudica's presence loomed large, both feared and revered. The Roman legions, though disciplined, would soon face the ultimate test. A force driven not by conquest, but by vengeance, whose leader had transformed grief into fury, pain into purpose, and rebellion into an inferno that threatened to engulf an empire. Amidst the smoldering ruins and the echoes of destruction, Suetonius Paulinus understood that survival alone would not suffice. Rome required more than endurance. It required a resurgence, a rebirth forged in strategy, discipline, and iron resolve. The general, standing upon a rise overlooking the war-torn countryside, surveyed the scattered remnants of his legions. Tired, demoralized, yet unbroken, his soldiers looked to him for guidance, for a vision that could turn despair into triumph. And Paulinus would deliver it. He chose the battleground with care, recognizing that victory would not come from brute force alone. A narrow defile, hemmed in by dense forests and flanking hills, became his stage. Here, Boudica's overwhelming numbers could be neutralized. Her warriors' fury would be funneled into a confined space where Roman discipline could dominate. The terrain, once a challenge, became an ally. Every tree, every slope, every bend in the path was studied, memorized, and woven into a plan that relied on precision, patience, and ruthless execution. Paulinus drilled his troops tirelessly. Shields were raised, formations reinforced, archers positioned to rain death upon approaching enemies. The legions, though diminished in number, became a living instrument of strategy. Each soldier was aware not only of his role, but of the purpose behind it. The general emphasized discipline above all. A single lapse could mean annihilation. "Hold your line," he commanded, "for chaos is the enemy's ally, but order is ours. Steel your hearts, for the storm comes, and only those steadfast will endure." His voice, calm yet commanding, carried the authority of Rome itself. Morale, fragile after the devastation of Camulodunum and other towns, was restored through the general's presence and unwavering resolve. Paulinus walked among the men, speaking words of reassurance and strategy, reminding them of victories past and the glory that awaited those who endured. He shared in their hardships, often taking the front lines during training and reconnaissance, demonstrating courage that inspired confidence. The soldiers came to see him not just as a commander, but as the embodiment of Roman resilience, a living symbol of the empire's undying spirit. Intelligence became the cornerstone of Paulinus's plan. Scouts and local allies provided invaluable information on Boudica's movements, numbers, and tactics. Every detail was scrutinized, every rumor weighed. He understood that while her fury was formidable, It was also predictable in its patterns. Passion drove her army as much as strategy, and in that passion lay vulnerability. By choosing the battlefield, controlling the approach, and managing the timing of engagement, Paulinus sought to turn raw fury into a tool that would play into his hands. The general's strategy was meticulous. First, delay and funnel the enemy into the chosen defile. Second, use the terrain to restrict their movements, preventing cavalry and overwhelming numbers from flanking or encircling. Third, deliver devastating volleys of arrows from prepared positions to weaken the front ranks. And finally, strike with disciplined infantry, holding firm as chaos crashed against Roman order. It was a plan that relied on intellect, timing, and, above all, unwavering discipline. In every soldier, Paulinus instilled the understanding that their strength lay not in numbers, but in cohesion, training, and the unbreakable will of Rome. Psychological warfare was equally important. Paulinus used the defile to create the illusion of a smaller contained force, baiting Boudica into attacking with overconfidence. By presenting a disciplined, immovable line, he forced the rebels to commit their fury into a confined space where it could be countered. He reinforced the idea that Roman soldiers were not merely fighting for territory or vengeance, but for the honor of an empire under siege. Each man's purpose was elevated above mere survival. They were defenders of civilization itself, guardians of Rome's soul on foreign soil. In preparation, Paulinus also ensured the supply lines were secured. Though cut off from immediate reinforcements, his legions were provisioned and fortified, ready to endure a prolonged confrontation if necessary. Every measure was calculated. Food, water, ammunition, and medical care were organized with military precision. The general left nothing to chance, understanding that in war, even minor oversights could lead to catastrophic failure. Discipline extended beyond the battlefield. It encompassed every aspect of survival, ensuring the legions were ready to meet the full force of Boudica's wrath. Leadership, Paulinus knew, was not only about command, but inspiration. He spoke to his soldiers of the legacy they were about to create. "History will remember this day," he declared, "not for the cities we lost, but for the courage we muster in the face of fire. We fight for Rome, for her honor, for her eternal spirit that no flame, no fury can extinguish. Stand firm, for today we shall turn despair into victory." His words, carried across the encampment, transformed fear into resolve. Men who trembled at the thought of Boudica's horde now stood ready, eyes steeled, hearts ignited with the purpose of a shared destiny. As the rebels advanced, Paulinus positioned his forces with meticulous care. Archers lined the flanks, prepared to unleash volleys into the mass of insurgents. Infantry held the center, shields interlocked, forming a wall that would resist the initial storm of attack. Cavalry was hidden, ready to strike at the decisive moment, while reserves stood vigilant, prepared to exploit any lapse in the enemy's cohesion. Every move had been rehearsed, every contingency anticipated. The general's mind, calm amidst the growing tension, orchestrated the battlefield like a master composer, each unit a note in a symphony of strategy. When Boudica's forces finally approached the defile, a hush fell over the Roman lines. The air vibrated with anticipation and fury. Paulinus, mounted at the center, surveyed the oncoming tide of insurgents. He knew the moment had come, not for revenge, but for justice, for the preservation of Rome's honor, for the assertion of order over chaos. The soldiers, inspired by his leadership and prepared through rigorous training, understood the stakes. They were no longer merely survivors, they were the embodiment of Rome's resilience, the living shield of an empire facing a storm of wrath. And so, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the defile, Suetonius Paulinus led his legions into battle. His strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve would be tested against Boudica's fury. Yet within him burned the certainty that discipline, courage, and intelligence could triumph over passion, that Rome's spirit, though challenged, could not be extinguished. The stage was set for the confrontation that would decide not only the fate of Britannia, but also the enduring legacy of one of history's most formidable leaders. In the crucible of fire and blood, Paulinus prepared to transform devastation into victory, despair into triumph, and chaos into the unyielding order of Rome. The morning mist clung to the narrow defile like a shroud, hiding the Roman legions from the eyes of the approaching storm. Boudica's forces advanced with the fury of centuries of injustice, a tidal wave of vengeance that threatened to sweep all before it. Tens of thousands of warriors, their faces painted with wrath, weapons gleaming in the pale dawn, pressed forward, their shouts a chorus of fury that echoed off the hills. Yet within the ranks of the disciplined Romans, a quiet tension held sway, a steadfastness born of preparation, strategy, and the unwavering presence of Suetonius Paulinus. The insurgents, confident in their numbers, surged into the defile. At first, it seemed the forested walls would crush them, funneling their rage into a confined corridor where maneuverability was lost. Arrows rained from concealed positions, striking the front ranks with deadly precision. Chaos rippled through the enemy lines, but Boudica, mounted high and resolute, pressed onward, inspiring her warriors with cries of vengeance. The battle had begun, not as a meeting of equals, but as a test of wills, endurance, and discipline. Paulinus held the center, his soldiers forming a shield wall that absorbed the brunt of the initial assault. Spears locked against shields, swords flashed in disciplined arcs, and Roman cohesion turned the tide of momentum against a seemingly overwhelming enemy. The rebel army, though fierce and numerous, began to falter within the confines of the defile. Their fury, untempered by strategy, collided with the immovable order of the Roman line. Every wave of attack that should have broken through was met with coordinated resistance, every surge of passion countered by the cold, precise efficiency of a legion well-trained and resolute. The terrain, once chosen by Paulinus for defense, now amplified the effectiveness of his strategy. The forests and hills prevented the enemy from flanking, forcing the insurgents to commit fully to the frontal assault. Arrows from hidden positions inflicted devastating casualties, breaking the rhythm of the charge and sowing confusion. Roman infantry, disciplined and resolute, held firm, transforming the defile into a trap where the chaos of passion became a weapon turned against itself. Boudica's warriors, caught in a crucible of their own making, struggled to adapt to the disciplined wall that resisted every attempt to break it. In the midst of the carnage, Boudica remained a figure of indomitable will. Her voice carried above the clash of steel and the cries of the dying, rallying her forces, urging them onward. Yet even her brilliance could not overcome the combined force of terrain, preparation, and Roman discipline. Wave after wave of insurgents collided with the unyielding legions, their fury blunted, their cohesion unraveling. The first cracks appeared in the once mighty tide of rebellion. Hesitation crept into ranks that had known only the singular purpose of vengeance. Paulinus seized the moment. Cavalry units, hidden until now, struck with precision against the disordered flanks of the enemy. Archers pressed their advantage, raining further devastation upon those trapped in the defile. The Roman line, disciplined and cohesive, became a force of annihilation, turning the rebels' own momentum into a liability. Boudica's army, once a wave of unstoppable fury, began to crumble under the relentless efficiency of Roman tactics. Panic spread where discipline had held, and the tide of vengeance that had swept across Britannia for weeks faltered at last. The queen, sensing the shift, attempted to rally her forces. Her eyes, blazing with anger and desperation, scanned the battlefield, seeking to restore order. Yet the cohesion she inspired through sheer will was no match for the discipline, preparation, and strategy of Paulinus's legions. One by one, her warriors fell, their cries echoing in the valley like the fading roar of a storm. Boudica's brilliance and passion, once feared as unstoppable, now met the unyielding steel of Roman order. The defile, chosen by Paulinus as a funnel, became the stage where the rebellion met its decisive undoing. By midday, the battle had turned utterly against the insurgents. Roman forces pressed forward, relentless, each advance crushing what remained of the rebel army. Survivors fled into the forests, pursued, harried, and diminished with every step. The once mighty threat of Boudica, which had brought Rome to the brink of humiliation, was reduced to scattered remnants, the echo of their fury lingering only as smoke over the battlefield. The queen herself vanished into history, leaving behind a legacy of courage, vengeance, and defiance, but unable to stem the disciplined tide of Roman power. The aftermath was both somber and triumphant. The battlefield, littered with the dead and the remnants of shattered rebellion, bore witness to the price of resistance and the enduring might of Rome. The legions, weary but unbroken, stood among the carnage, a living testament to preparation, discipline, and leadership. Paulinus, surveying the field, understood that victory had come not from brute force alone, but from the careful orchestration of strategy, the steadfast courage of soldiers, and the relentless application of order against chaos. Britannia, for the moment, was pacified. The rebellion, fierce and consuming as it had been, was extinguished, and Roman authority reasserted across the province. Yet the fires that had swept through towns and villages left a scar deeper than any weapon could inflict. The legend of Boudica endured, a symbol of defiance and courage that would echo across generations. Rome had won the battle, but the war for hearts and memories had already been indelibly marked by the queen's fury. In the years that followed, historians, poets, and chroniclers would speak of the inferno that had engulfed Britannia, the storm that tested the mettle of a general, and the courage of an empire pressed to its limits. Suetonius Paulinus became a figure immortalized in tales of strategy and resilience, his leadership during the crisis a defining moment in Roman history. Britannia remained under Rome's control, the empire's authority restored. Yet the shadow of Boudica's uprising served as a reminder that even the mightiest empires could be challenged by the courage of those who refused to bow. And so, the fires of revolt faded, leaving ashes and memory alike. Rome endured, its legions tempered by adversity, its command reaffirmed by discipline and strategy. Boudica's name survived, immortalized not only for the destruction she wrought, but for the indomitable spirit she represented. In this crucible of fire and blood, both victor and vanquished left their mark, shaping the history of Britannia and the empire for generations to come. The Inferno had ended, but its story and the lessons of courage, leadership, and the cost of rebellion would echo across the centuries.